Hey guys, Roxabox90 here with a video about the new, Gatecrash spoilers that have been going on. So I've been asked to do a video going over my favorite cards or the best cards in Gatecrash for EDH, and I am not going to do that now because I want to wait for the set to be fully spoiled, and that way I know all the best cards and I can pick out what I think are the best and explain why. But I will go over the 5 mechanics from the new guilds that have been spoiled. So the first one I'm going to do is the Boros one, which is Battalion. For example, Fireman Avenger, whenever it and at least 2 other creatures attack, it has an ability. In this case, Lightning Helix. So where in Standard this sort of thing may be harder to pull off, in EDH it is definitely quite possible ability to get rolling, especially since games go longer, more creatures are played, and many aggro decks end up where you have swinging 5, 6, 7, 10, whatever creatures. So I think the ability is probably much stronger in EDH than maybe some of the other formats, because in the other formats you have this limitation. It's fairly hard without super aggro token focus to make it work. So I think it's definitely a stronger EDH mechanic. Evolve, which goes back to Graft from the old Ravnica set, similar concept except ramped up. So I used Fathom Mage as the example because it's actually a pretty good EDH card, I think. Its the ability Evolve, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than this creature, put a 1/1 counter on this creature, and of course, whenever 1/1 counter is put on her, something happens. In this case, you draw a card, which is amazing. But in terms of the ability, it's pretty good for aggro decks, especially for decks like Momorvig or Experiment Kraj that use a lot of 1/1 counters and a lot of moving around counters and Graft. This ability will just be a great addition for those decks. If anything, it'll just be a nice boost since it's potentially an even stronger ability than Graft was. So I don't necessarily think this is better in EDH than in other formats, but you'll definitely see decks that run Evolve or incorporate it into their already Graft and token focus. Thirdly, we have Rubble Hulk, which is the example for Bloodrush, the Gruul mechanic, which basically says X amount of mana, discard Rubber Hulk from your hand. Target attacking creature gets X+X, where X is the number of lands you control. So it's like a giant growth effect, essentially. Is it particularly good in EDH compared to other formats? I don't think so, to be honest. But aggro beatdown like that it's not the strongest sort of mechanic. It's generally more casual in EDH and Commander. It's not something that has a proven value to work consistently because there's so many Wraths effects, so many good exile and creatures and so on. Whereas in things like Standard, it's fairly easy to build an aggro focus, especially if green and red has been for the longest time a well-known color, even if it's a rug variant. But it's a pretty powerful. So I think it's decent enough. I don't think it's particularly great or particularly bad. It's kind of a whatever sort of ability. I don't think it's going to necessarily turn heads in EDH. And now we get to Whispering Madness, which uses Cipher, which, as Mr. Orange Guy and many others have pointed out, is kind of a silly and overly complicated ability where it's encoded to a creature. You might as well have the ability be in code, so it doesn't really make any sense. But whatever, regardless, Cipher is probably the strongest of the new abilities for EDH in terms of its impact, because it can be easily built around, and it gives you constant reusability of pretty powerful spells. For example, this one is essentially Windfall, which in EDH is a ridiculously good card for many decks. I think it can be pretty powerful and definitely will be incorporated into many decks, as well as probably spawn a whole bunch of its own builds and decks just with this ability. So we'll have to see if they make legendary creatures that have a variant of this, because that could definitely be an EDH build. And finally, we have Extort, which is pretty flavorful, if anything. And I think it's also a pretty powerful EDH ability. For example, this card, which I think is a decent EDH card because it's a 6/4/4/4. Whenever it attacks, you may return an artifact, creature, or enchantment from your graveyard to your hand. So it's constant, gives you back cards to reuse, and it has Extort on it, so it lets you reuse those cards, and of course as a mana sink. That's kind of the reason Extort is a good ability, because it acts as a mana sink. If you have lots of extra mana and not much to do with it, every spell you play now has an additional value. Obviously, 1 life, and 1 life doesn't really matter, but in multiplayer, where each opponent loses a life, you can potentially get 3-4 life for 1 mana. It's a very, very nice mana sink. So those are the 5 abilities that are coming out in Gatecrash. Again, I think the strongest ones probably lean towards Cipher and Extort in terms of their use in EDH. Of course, the others can be made to work and probably will see some play, if anything, but I think those are the 2 that people will be most excited about to work into their decks and figure out how to make work. And of course, that is my opinion, but I'd love to hear yours, so please comment below in the comments section and let me know what you think of the 5 abilities. And of course, stay tuned for soon, hopefully when the spoiler season is wrapping up, the video of my favorite EDH cards and potentially where and how Gatecrash is going to affect your EDH game. Thanks for watching, guys. Check out my channel sponsors below in the description, and as always, RoxaBox90 signing out. I'll see you guys next time.